Hello, everyone. Good morning. Chris, thank you for this. I think that this is the highlight of my talk. I actually have 4 jobs at Rice. I get paid for only one, but I have 4 jobs. I'm the chair of the economics department. I'm a magister of one of the residential colleges. I'm also faculty, which means that I teach and I do my research. And I'm also the director of the Center for Economic Mobility. And the wonderful part about the Kinder Institute is that all of the research that we do is in direct benefit of our community. And I'm very pleased that I get to play this role. And I asked the team where the meeting was going to be, and they told me A-Leaf. And it's so interesting because A-Leaf, I have been working with A-Leaf for 10 years now. And what I'm going to tell you is a story about something that started 5 years ago. And let me start this story by telling you what I read about 2 weeks ago in a magazine for economists with the title, Economist. And what the Economist did was they used ChatGPT to conduct a study on books over the last 100 years. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to understand, has writing become really different over the last 100 years? So they got a large sample of books, they uploaded the books, they asked ChatGPT to start looking at common patterns in the data over these 100 years. Do you want to know what ChatGPT concluded? It concluded that vocabulary in writing has become less varied. But the thing that really shocked me was that the length of sentences has become really short. And now I want to put these 2 findings to you right now because some thoughts and feelings that we have are really complex, right? Some of the issues that we face as a community are really complex issues. So if the sentences that we're writing are shorter and they have poorer vocabulary, can we truly communicate the complexity of the ideas that we need to keep in our heads? And there is a lot of debate right now about whether some of the polarization that we see, that people attribute a lot to social media, and that might be true, actually comes because of the fact that language has become simpler in many ways. So not consistent with complex ideas, okay? Now, why am I talking to you about this? It's because unless we can actually truly address complex problems, I don't think we can attack economic mobility in a meaningful way. So what's going on here is something else that people have been talking about a long time, and doesn't happen only in Harris County, it happens across this nation, and it happens around many of nations, and that many kids are actually not reading at grade level, or are not reading at proficiency, at a proficient level. So I want to give you this statistic that in our region, about 51% of kids don't actually read above basic level. They read below the basic level. And when I saw this statistic, and by the way, this has been stable over the last 10 years. It was already at that level when I came to Houston in 2014. And for a point of comparison, across the nation is 41%. So we're 10 percentage points above what the nation is. So we're doing worse than the rest of the nation. And when I realized this, I tried to understand what it really meant. What is going on here? And being a researcher, I decided to read the literature on reading proficiency. And what that literature shows is that reading skills really are the product of two things. Decoding skills, so if you put F and L and A and V and I and O, you know that that corresponds to a sound of Flávio. But that's only one part of reading. The other part of reading is language. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me a story of his dad, who had a small store, a small grocery store back in Brazil, where I'm from. And my granddad sold everything, including coffee and bread, in his store. And every morning, there were these two gentlemen that would come and get some coffee and get the newspaper, and one of the guys would read the newspaper, and the other one would explain to the one who had just read the newspaper what it is that he had read. And I had never understood this type of interaction until I actually read these papers. Decoding does not mean understanding. Decoding means producing the sound. But understanding is a critical aspect of reading. Here's the part that is tricky. Most of the variation in reading proficiency, though, is not driven by decoding ability, it's reading by language skills. So there is beautiful work by someone in education who did this work actually in Houston. She's now retired and moved to Florida. But she showed that 80% of the variation in reading proficiency in Houston was due to language variation. Only 20% was because of decoding skills. And when I saw that, I became really interested in what is language? How do we learn language? When do we learn language? And I don't know if you actually realize that, but I bet you do, is that I have an accent. That's because my first and native language was Portuguese, and I didn't come to the United States and started learning English until much later in my life. And I've been living in this country for 21 years. I love it here. But my guess is that I'll die with this accent. And part of the reason is because the part of the brain that guides my capacity to produce English sounds was already set by the time I came to the United States and by the time I started studying English. I'll never lose my accent. It doesn't really matter how much I'm going to invest in losing that accent. And I can spend days with my colleague, Ervin, who is a native speaker, and she can correct my pronunciation every single day, but the next day is going to be wrong again. But that's not important. My accent is bad, but I still feel that people can understand me, right? Okay. Here's the part that drives me crazy. I love James Bond's movies. Just love them. I shouldn't, I know, but I love them. And when I go to watch the movies, I actually don't go to the movie theater anymore to see James Bond's movies, because the one thing always happens. James Bond is a phenomenal guy. He can drive and talk on the phone while checking his cell phone and making sure that he's planning the next escape while being chased by a plane, a helicopter, a boat, and 3 other cars, right? And when he's on that phone, being chased with all that sound around, I cannot understand any single word that he says. But that's if I watch that movie in English. If I watch that movie in Portuguese, I have no problems understanding what it is that James Bond is saying. And again, this comprehension skill, this language comprehension skill, the capacity to understand language when you have so much other things competing for your attention, is another aspect of language that is determined in early childhood. Again, I wasn't exposed to English when I was a young kid. I was exposed to Portuguese, which explains why I can understand James Bond when the movie is dubbed in Portuguese, but there is no way that I can understand what it is that he's saying when there is so much competition for my attention in terms of sound. My wife always asks me, you love it so much that you watch it always twice, at the movie theater and at home. And what I told her one time was, no, I watch at home so I actually understand what it is going on in the movie. So once I understood this, we partnered with A-Leaf ISD over a period of 5 years. Now, all the partnerships that we have are long-term partnerships. But this partnership is specific to a project on early language development. Because one of the things that the research showed is that a lot of parents don't actually seem to know that early language is the product of early language environment. And it is the conversation, it's the back and forth between parents and children. It's also how parents use language when the kids are really young. So we did, in the first year, an assessment of the language development of those kids that A-Leaf wanted to include in the program. And what we found was that 75 to 80% of the kids, and I'm saying, I want you to imagine kids who are between 16 months old and 30 months old, okay? So those kids, 75 to 80% of them, were actually below average in terms of language development. Already at that age, they were lagging behind in terms of language. But what was shocking was that 75% to 80% of those households had a language environment quality that is below average in the United States. So then what we did was this 5-year project with A-Leaf to design, implement, and evaluate a parent education program that teaches parents about early language development. And this curriculum is delivered over 10 weeks. It's center-based and it's group-based. So parents come to an A-Leaf center, and they, for 1 hour, what they do is they listen to the evidence on early brain development and early language development. We literally translated scientific, peer-reviewed papers for these parents. These are papers in neuroscience and papers in education and papers in developmental psychology. We then asked parents to think about how to use this information in their day-to-day lives with their kids. And then we gave them a device that recorded the quality of the language environment, and we asked them to meet certain targets of this early language environment. And it's so interesting because this report that we produce that is entirely based on recordings that we do creates stars if parents actually meet the targets. Now, I'll say I've never been contacted by people, not academics, until the day that we issued the first report, because there was a bug in the code creating the records, and many parents had met their targets but not received their stars. And oh my God, did I get calls that day. And we fixed it, but we also realized that parents actually loved to receive that information, right? So after 5 years, let me tell you what it is that we found. Number one, we found huge impact on how much parents actually knew about early brain development and early language development. Huge impact. Number two, we found that the parents and the children interacted a lot more verbally, a lot more. And they started, remember, those are parents that were starting way below average, and we brought them above average, okay? But what is so interesting about this data is that it allows us to see, is it that the parents are initiating more conversations? Is it that once a conversation is initiated, they are talking longer to the children? Or is it the fact that the children are initiating more conversations and then the parents are engaging more and longer? So here's the interesting finding. we did not find any difference in the number of conversation segments that we see in the data. So whether you participated in this program or you didn't participate in the program, the number of conversations that you had with your child was exactly the same for both groups. But you know what was different? What was different was what happens when a child initiates a conversation. Then the conversations are way longer. The parents respond in a way that encourage that back and forth to continue. So you guys heard a lot about serve and return, right? So now what's so interesting was it's not so much that the parents were serving more. They were serving with the same frequency. The difference was in the return. And that is critical because if I take a 2-year-old child and I start talking about statistics with that child will not show a lot of interest in that conversation. I guarantee you. I tried. But if the child initiates a conversation, by nature it's a conversation that the child is interested in. So if I continue that conversation, if I don't change the topic of that conversation, we can then continue to engage the child. And it's so important, this continuing engagement, because then again, the way children learn language is by practicing. They cannot learn language theoretically. They need to actually have someone who guides them. And I'm going to close with another story that involves my family. There was one time when my niece, who is now 23, she was 2 years old, and I was playing with her, and we played for a long, long time. I'm going to say 2 hours, maybe almost 3 hours. It was a lot of fun that we had. You know, I don't get to see my nieces that often. They live in Brazil. So when I do see them, I want to spend a lot of time with them. And at the end of that interaction, she was so happy. She was exhausted, of course. Not fun to interact with me at all. But she was so happy with that attention that she said something in Portuguese that was wrong. And I just said, in response, the right way of actually saying that feeling that she actually had in Portuguese. And what she said was, I love you, but instead of saying, I love you, she said, I love to you. And I replied, I love you. And believe me, after that day, she never said again, I love to you anymore. It is this back and forth is so important because it's the way we actually model language for kids. Okay? So we have a huge problem, which is reading proficiency in our county. It's worse than in other places in the United States. It's a decoding and a language problem. Schools can take care of the decoding problem. We can't wait until kids get to first grade or kindergarten to start helping them learn language skills. That has to start early. There is a component of it that is truly because parents don't understand the importance of the back and forth, the serve and return. That's why they're not doing it. But the good news is that it doesn't really require money or anything expensive for us to address that one problem. So we will continue to follow these kids as they age. We will continue to see how their language and their reading schools are progressing in pre-K, K, grade 1, grade 2, and as I tell the rest of my team, after I'm dead, they should continue following these kids once they join the labor market. Because the notion of what these things that we are interested in, we're interested in them not only because we want kids to be able to read, but we are interested in them because unless they are able to understand and communicate complex ideas, I think it's going to be hard for us to move the needle in economic mobility. Okay? Thank you so much. I don't know if I can take questions or how you guys want to do this, and I don't even know if we have time for that, but yeah. Thank you.